Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Scottish Police Authority People Committee. Some housekeeping. Should I drop off the call, can I ask that Alistair Hayes step in and chair the meeting until I get reconnected? Is that okay, Alistair?
Of course, no problem.
As all meetings, I'd like to make a particular welcome to colleagues from our trade unions and staff associations, and I know our Majesty Inspector Constabulary are on the call too. As a reminder to all attendees, and for those that are watching for the first time, I want to provide clarity at the outset that when papers are presented, we take initial comments and questions from SPA board members before I then enable and bring in the Staff Association Union attendees to provide members with any wider perspectives that they may wish. Members are obviously then able to ask further questions following these comments and observations. I've got no member apologies today, but we do have an apology from Director Miller, the Director of People and Development. I'd also like today to a particular welcome to board member Angela Leach, who in February was appointed by the board as a member of this committee. Angela brings with her a wealth of experience and knowledge and will add great value to work of this committee, so welcome, Angela. Can we move on first to declarations of interest or connections? There's none been notified in advance. Is there any members would wish to make now? None. The item 1.3 was a public minute from the meeting held on the 25th of February, and then invite members to agree the draft is an accurate record for approval. And members content to agree with that. Thank you. Decisions taken since the last meeting of the committee, item 1.4. In accordance with the authority's corporate governance framework, urgent approvals under standing orders can be done by correspondence. In March, the committee approved on that occasion a change to the recruitment process for an assistant chief constable post. This was due to the nature of the appointment to a specific portfolio rather than a broad general assessment process. And it was proposed that the recruitment process would be best suited to be led by Police Scotland under the direction of the Director of People and Development on that occasion. The other one was in April, changes to the health and safety policy and fire safety policy were approved by correspondence, given the dependency on approval of the policy to progress the rollout of the wider revised procedures and guidance. This was a request made by Police Scotland for the matter to be considered before the timeline for today's committee meeting. Are there any comments then would like to make about taking those items in correspondence? If members content to know that. Yeah. Thank you. We then move on to item 1.5, which is the rolling action log in matters arising. There is updates on the public actions and all are proposed for closure. Are members content to agree the updates in the log and closure? Yeah. Thank you. We then, item 1.6, we have to take a decision on taking business in private. That's items 6 and 7. In accordance with section 20 of the SPA standing orders, I now invite members to agree taking the agenda items 6 and 7 in private. Before we move to these items, I will pause the call and ask for people to leave the call at that time. Are members content that we take items 6 and 7 in private? Yes. That's agreed. We then move on to the substantial papers in the committee. The first one under 2.1 is the Wellbeing Report and Action Plan Update, and we have grateful to have Nikki Page, the Chief Officer for Human Resources at Police Scotland. Nikki, can I ask you to speak to the paper?
Certainly can. Thank you, Chair. That's much appreciated. So this is the Health and Wellbeing Q4 report. I think members are aware that what we've been looking at is pushing the prevent approach from a kind of more responsive position. There's significant developments ongoing. There's reports and updates on them. We are working just now on the mapping so as that we're in a good place as well to develop the Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Action Plan for 25-26. So that's work ongoing. There's an update on lifelines and just pointing out the good work in regards to the MOU done with both the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the Scottish Ambulance Service. So there's some really good collaborative work going on in that space, as you would anticipate and you would challenge us to do. But I hope that gives members assurance that that's still important relationships that we're continuing to progress there. Wellbeing champions, just to highlight to members that we will be going into a 12-month network review of that scheme. And in the first instance, we'll report our findings to Finance and People Board, and obviously anything relevant coming from that you would anticipate we would bring to yourselves. We've also redesigned the wellbeing assessment for 2025, and that has now progressed out to the workforce. So that's good. And just another quick highlight as well as the use of the intranet site over the last 12-month period. We've now got 102,000 hits on that. So it's clearly something that the workforce is accessing. Is something important to the workforce. I think that's a highlight and a good thing. Equally, we've done some work on the WHO criteria, and I think there is a challenge, and I think it's worthy to point out in regards to sleep quality in the workforce, and that's something that we're going to have a think about. There is some updates on ill health, retirement and injury and duty, but there's also a separate paper on the agenda, so I won't go into any detail on that. And then just to highlight again, further access by the workforce to both physio and more OHU referrals as well. So obviously if we're putting in reasonable adjustments in that, that's critical that we get those referrals into the system. So I think that's important to highlight. And lastly, our EAP service, we are hitting that 86% rate of those participating in the AP service seeing improvement in their mental health, which I think is another thing to highlight. So I'll stop there. My colleague Damien Shannon, who does all the hard work with his team, is on the call as well, but happy to take any observations or indeed questions, Chair, and thanks for that.
Thanks for that. Okay, can I offer it to board members for any questions at this stage? I've got Alistair Hay and then Angela Leach.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Nikki, for the update. I've got two questions. The first one is on the wellbeing index, which I'm reading that as an evaluation of all the activities that are going on within Police Scotland, and you're benchmarking it against a well-established index. And good on this is 52%, and Police Scotland are currently sitting at 46%. So work to be done, and there's a lot of work indicated within this report. But as you drew out there, the lowest score within that overall index was on rest and recharge. Yeah. And I may be making the wrong connection here, but there is a challenge around re-rostered rest days that continues within policing, as well as the nature of the work. So I'm just wondering, one, what is the overall thought on improving the wellbeing score, and specific thoughts around rest and recharge? So that's my first question. And my second question is in relation to great to see the collaborative work that's going on within the health and safety section, health and wellbeing, health and safety section. And you're going to do some joint work on, I probably can't pronounce this, audiometry. And clearly there was issues reported around events like Operation Moonbeam, the fireworks. So just maybe a wee update on that, and linking it to the fit for task medicals that go on within policing as well, because that's joined together. So just where are we with that progress there, and thoughts on the WHO Wellbeing Index? Sorry, these are very long questions.
No, not at all. So I'll comment and then I'll invite Damien in to say anything that I've maybe not covered as detailed as he might, if that's okay. So in terms of the wellbeing index, that was one of the reasons that I certainly drew that out in the paper, because you would want that to be higher. And rest and recharge is, as you've rightly pointed out and observed from the paper, one of the challenges. In terms of activities ongoing, obviously there's some of them details in the paper, but over and above that, you are aware that we're progressing force mobilisation model. Part of the reason for doing that is because we are conscious that our front line tend to have far more disruption and re-rostering as a consequence of events than perhaps those that are in not back office, but operational requirements mean that they're in an office setting more often than colleagues that are maybe doing response or other kind of activities within local policing. So on that basis, the force mobilisation model will allow us to kind of spread the load, which I think will have an effect on that. Also, in both the report that was against the action and again in the workforce strategic dashboard, you will see that the drive on looking at re-rostered rest days and ensuring that they are uniformly coming down is an absolute commitment by the force, and we have made progress on that front. Not that we are getting complacent, because it's always a challenge. Resources, as you know, have went down. That's documented in the paper as well. So we are always going to have pressures on those resources. They are extremely precious, and we've got to balance up the pressures on those resources. But certainly these activities, force mobilisation and that, should also have an impact. So I would be optimistic that as we roll these programmes out, we might be able to relook at some of this and see if it's going to have the desired effect that we are anticipating and indeed hoping for. In terms of odometry, you will be aware that kind of as a standard now, there is a hearing piece that can be accessed by all officers who are going into an event where it has been assessed as a risk. And on that basis, the whole workforce has access to putting in and getting it. These are fitted pieces, so they can obviously apply and get them. So they should have their own one, and they should be able to use them at events as well. So that's been rolled out obviously since the 2003 Moonbeam, where obviously we didn't have the provision as slick as it is now. But that is absolutely embedded, and there should be no officer that can't access that and ensure they've got the right equipment to do the job if there's an event where noise is an issue. But I'll pause there and see if I've missed anything that Damien or indeed the DEP wants to add to what I've said.
I can probably add a little bit on the index side of things. So for us, it was a real positive that we got to include this year. It's the first time, so gives us a baseline. And also, we've only had our action plan approved since November. So for us, next time around, it'll be really interesting to see how we shift the dial in terms of specific areas and really being able to commit to the actions that we have. Both nationally but also locally in terms of what we're doing with our plans there as well. As you say, there's a number of areas that we can pull out that need work, and working with areas such as RDU is really important to ensure that it's not just a P&D problem or health and wellbeing issue, but it is wider than that in terms of what we're doing for support. And in terms of the health surveillance, the audiometry work that we're doing is really a scoping exercise at the moment, and it will very much be a case of it complementing what we do in the medical space and the fit for task space, rather than it being standalone. So it's really important, as Nikki says as well, that we identify the risk area and that we work from there. So thank you.
Thanks, Damien. Is there any other comments from Scotland that you wish to make? And in relation to the fit for task medicals, Alistair, has that answered your question?
Just for clarity, it has, but just for clarity, and for myself, police Scotland don't run a series of, you join the service, get your initial recruitment medical, but, on a 3-year period, do you get a routine medical just to, monitor
Absolutely.
your health and well-being
Absolutely.
through your career?
Absolutely. You get there's a full regime of fitness for task medicals across all areas, specialist areas in particular, and this health surveillance program would be something that we'd be looking to complement that rather than to affect it.
Thanks for that, Damien. And that, I think that fitness for tasks, so the medicals are tailored to the role that you're performing within Police Scotland.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Angela Leach, would you like to ask your question, please? Also, keep your hand down.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Nikki, for a really interesting report, quite fascinating. I wanted to ask about the follow-up to the internal audit of ill health retirement and injury on duty. And first of all, to commend the work that you've done there in terms of carrying out that survey. 2 questions really on this. One, will the survey continue? And what learning have you taken from the feedback that you've got? And I know that you'll possibly come out of this in the next paper, but I just wondered, in overall terms, what kind of feedback have you taken and what kind of action have you taken as a result of the work that you've undertaken in the survey?
So, yeah, another important point. I think the service understand that going through an ill health retirement process is obviously, it's a massive change in your life because you're effectively leaving a career that's got a lot of security in that to it. So we had, as you may or may not be aware, we had certain examples brought to our attention, and I thank colleagues on the call certainly who brought them to our attention, going through the process and feeling that it wasn't as supportive as it should have been. Now we do have it's a regulatory process, and it's quite laborious and it is quite time consuming, and of course that puts an inordinate amount of stress on people who are waiting for decisions around about their life and their livelihood. So as a consequence of that, that is why we looked at this and we did the survey. And the intention was to say, right, what can we do to improve in that area? Now, obviously, we've got a good rate now in terms of that survey of how people are feeling more supported. Now, that doesn't mean we can become complacent. And the other reality of all this is that we've got probably a better internal process as well that is less visible, I suppose, around about what we are doing when people are becoming modified and maybe have degenerative conditions that at some stage will lead to ill health retirement. So there's a better process in place to manage people through that journey internally, so that they can be deployed to other work as far as practical. And then at the stage of ill health retirement, we've certainly put in a process that has far more discussion with line management at front end and far more visibility of the process. So I think that's helping. Now that's an evolving process as well, so we intend to build on it. We are building on it as we've experienced and we're getting feedback. The Federation have been really helpful, I would have to say, in meeting with us and saying, this is the kind of dialogue that's happening at a local level. This is where we think there needs to be more information for people on that. So that's helped us tremendously in terms of building that. So it would be our intention to continue to monitor that with the support, I hasten to say, of the staff associations, the trade unions, because they feed into us on a regular basis, and that is really significant for us in terms of being able to respond either to an individual case or to a more generic issue sensitively and with kind of informed judgment from what they are getting fed back into the system. So I hope that gives you some assurance that there's an ongoing look in this area and there's ongoing work. And obviously the fact that in the next paper is the kind of more deep dive, the fact that there is a higher concentration of review in this space, I would think that we would continue to be able to learn from that and progress the system, because we do understand it's a very difficult thing to go through, because a lot of the people in this space have spent their whole career in policing. So it's a major life change, and we have got to be sensitive, and we've got to support people through that, knowing that some people are going to find that extremely difficult and never find the process a pleasant process. But if we can make it as easy for them as possible, that is certainly our aim. I don't know if Damien wants to add anything to any other of the findings specifically from that, but it's just to give that assurance. And it's also to take that opportunity to thank the Federation and indeed the trade unions, who bring a number of cases to us to help us support individuals as well.
I would just support what you've said, Nikki, around it being a two-way communication that will be ongoing. The feedback's really important, that we take that and cognizant of it as we move through, and really are in a position to react to that as it comes. So I think you've covered it. Thank you.
I think one of the points that has been raised is, will the survey that was carried out be continued? Will that be repeated?
So at the moment it's not scheduled, but that doesn't mean that we won't do it. That's still under kind of discussions at the moment, as far as I'm aware, Tom.
Maybe you could keep us updated now. You know, obviously having some baseline is very helpful as we go forward. Okay, Angela, are you content with that?
No, that's great, and it is really heartening. I sit on NARAC, as you know, and it's really good to see an internal audit being taken seriously and they being followed up in this way. So thank you for that.
Thanks for that. Before I move on to the next item, our staff associations and trade union colleagues, have you any comments or observations you'd wish to make at this stage? Can we go first to David Threadgold?
Chair, thank you. In danger of continuing the theme of positivity, you know, I think you know, some of the issues that, you know, we have been very public and vocal in raising around, you know, the processes that have existed. What I would have to say is that the service has been absolutely engaged with us in trying to identify and address those issues. You know, I've had meetings with Damien and his team, you know, to highlight from, you know, the front line, as it were, what the challenges are and what the differences are between what is spoken about publicly and the reality for frontline cops. Particular examples around, you know, trim. I know that is, you know, spoken about, you know, at a high level as being part of the offer, and it is, but there's been an engagement from, you know, the service to review that process, because we think that it needs that. The same with Police Care UK and Lifelines. Meetings have taken place with Lifeline, certainly, and there's one scheduled with Police Care UK to try and identify and establish exactly what the offer is, so that we can get to that preventative space that Nikki spoke about at the start. But, you know, there is still work ongoing in that respect. You know, I must caution those words with, you know, we have still got major challenges around the geography in Scotland and making sure that, you know, operational officers and staff across the country can have access to the same service as they would in, you know, the large, you know, population areas where they're more likely to have access to a supervisor and that type of thing. So those are my comments. If I could make a couple of points specifically about the paper, if that's okay.
Yes, please. There you go.
Thanks very much. I know that the Wellbeing Champions programme was spoken about, and I know that it's effectively under review. I would agree that needs to take place. The evidence that I get is that programme has little, if any, value, and I think, you know, I've certainly communicated that to the service, and that is work I think that will, if we're going to get real value from that programme, there is a significant amount of work that needs to be able to do there, most notably because officers who are trained simply cannot get the time to learn and deliver or engage with those who are, you know, working across Scotland. And I know that there's an element of time set aside for that programme. I had one question, Nikki, rather than just rambling, but I'll come to that, and it was to do with the Optima point about your wellbeing assessment at point 2.12, and that it had been sent to all officers and staff. I wonder whether the board, or certainly when I read it, the distinction or a distinction between police officers and staff would have been perhaps helpful there, to see, you know, who is actually responding to that document, and of the 887 reviews that had taken place, is that within the capacity of Optima to deal with that demand? And also, what is the distinction between COPs? As I say, is it the case that, certainly my experience would be, if you are in non-operational frontline roles, you're more likely to have the time and the sort of, the information available to you to engage in that type of activity than frontline officers, although that is largely anecdotal at this point. And just on at point 2.45, which is to do with, I'll just bring it up here so I can talk exactly about it, if that's okay. 2.45 it is, which talks about the Employee Assistance Programme. And again, it's a similar kind of point. It's just the wording of it. Since the 1st of April, we've had 1,956 officer and staff contacts. I wondered if, certainly when I read it, that lack of distinction again between police officers and staff, to see who we are actually affecting by those contacts. And, are we saying, are large swathes of the borders of the north of Scotland, or whatever it happens to be, being less affected by that programme that exists because of their location and the type of activity that they're undertaking? And I think those were my comments. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. And I'm sure those comments, which are very valid, will be taken on board by Nikki and her team in terms of future reporting on this, maybe some narrative around that. And get in the detailed list, they've got an obvious answer today.
I think obviously the detail of it will be in various different reports from Optima, and we will have some more. Some of that information certainly will definitely exist. So maybe, David, I can offer you, I've thrown Damien Shannon a quick meeting with Damien to maybe look at some of that and see what that does or doesn't reflect, and if that helps in terms of assurance around about membership and the kind of issues you might be thinking about.
No, I appreciate that. I was kind of looking at it through the lens of the authority, and being able to, I'm not suggesting obviously for a second that doesn't allow you to scrutinise the information that's there, but that kind of breakdown of detail in my mind might have been helpful. But again, I just throw that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's certainly noted by me, and we'll take that up. Rob Hay.
Thanks, Chair. Are you able to hear me okay? I'm using a headset this morning, which is not my usual mode.
You're coming through.
Excellent. Listen, we really support and welcome the report that Nikki's laid in front of the committee this morning. We note that really positive activity that's undergoing. I guess what I would say is it's against a backdrop of really challenging trends for the service. An 85% increase in officers off with psychological illness and mental ill health over the last 4 years. And we've seen that challenge amongst the senior ranks as well within Police Scotland. That challenge is by no means unique to Police Scotland. I've been at the annual joint meeting of executives for our sister staff associations this week over in Northern Ireland, along with the Police Superintendents Association of England and Wales, as well as SANI, and they are facing similar challenges, I'd have to say. So I guess while we're looking at some really positive work that's ongoing, I think we have to really acknowledge the scale of the challenge that UK policing faces right now in this space. And I guess my concern is against a backdrop of a shrinking workforce, both at federated and superintendent ranks, that kind of intensity, that pressure that's upon officers, particularly those in operational roles, will only continue. So I think that as well as the very specific work we're doing around about wellbeing, it's worth looking at broader indicators such as completion rates for high career appraisals and things like that as well, just so we have a holistic understanding of where we're able to reach in to individuals and carry out those less formal assessments of their well-being and kind of spirits at any one time. So looking at that broader piece, I think, is something that would assist the service and our capacity to do that. And I know you've mentioned fitness for task, medicals. I think so. I've been speaking to colleagues at the PSA around about psychological risk assessment for senior command roles, and I think that's something that as an association we'd like to see the service explore going forward, because that fitness for task, some of the most intense pressure that comes upon our members, is very much in the context of event command, very much in the context of senior investigating officers and the public pressure and scrutiny that comes along with that, firearms commanders, public order commanders, etc. So where we've seen a definite uptick in our memberships suffering from, at times, quite significant mental ill health, we'd like to see that approach, that preventative approach, extended to those in senior command positions. And I guess the final thing to say was acknowledging what Nikki said around about the challenges of the end-to-end ill health retirement process. I would just want to say that my most recent end-to-end experience of that, supporting a colleague through that, was actually a really positive one. And you know, the team within P&D, right up to Director Katie Miller, were extremely supportive throughout that process, which reflects extremely well of the service, and we'd like, you know, that to be the benchmark for colleagues who find themselves in those positions going forward. So absolutely credit where it's due in terms of that experience, and I really hope that can be the typical experience going forward for any colleague that finds herself in that position. And that's probably all I would say to you on this morning, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. And thanks for that feedback. I'm sure others in the call will greatly appreciate that. David, before I offer it back to members, I see your hand still. Is that legacy, or do you want to come back? Okay, thanks.
Apologies.
No, it's okay. Colleagues, is there anyone want to offer any comments or questions after hearing our Staff Association and Union Code? Okay, I mean, just this is a very, very complex area and difficult area, and there's not one silver or magic bullet. You know, it's all the things that we do that make a difference. And we've heard today the positive feedback of the response to, for instance, TRIM from David and the Federation. We've heard today a response to end-to-end treatment of people in ill health retirement, when we heard such negative feedback on that previously. So but we are seeing the step change in this, and I think everybody in the call, and I think it comes up later in the agenda, the issue around psychological injury and ill health is very, very in front of us. We're very alert to that in other areas as well. So all the feedback adds up, and there's a weight of evidence about what needs to be done, and we'll continue to monitor that as a committee. We expect the Police Scotland colleagues, the SPA colleagues in the background, to be taking on board the feedback and bringing that evidence through in the dashboards, etc., that we've been developing. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. It keeps it right front and centre for us, and we know where we need to keep the emphasis of inquiry and curiosity from this committee in terms of this area. It certainly would not understate at all the challenge it poses to an enormous organisation and institution like policing, particularly when you think of the trauma that people are exposed to daily. So thanks, Brendan, for bringing that. And it's a theme that just will be a constant in this committee. And we look to hear the stories of TRIM and end-to-end and other areas, you know, around fit for task, etc., as those positive stories start to build up. So thank you. Can we move on to item 2.2, is the actual report on ill health, retirement and injury and duty. Nikki, is it yourself again?
Yes, it is indeed, Chair, thank you. So this is the 6 months look back. So we've had 29 cases, 26 ill health retirals and 3 redeployments in that period. That brings the 24-25 total up to 49 ill health retirements and 6 redeployments. In the same 6 month period, we've had 22 IOD submissions, and that's totaling 36 in the full annual period. Now the categories will come as no surprise to members that the kind of categories that have required injury and duty awards, the highest one, unsurprisingly perhaps given the nature of policing, is injuries by suspects or a member of the public, which is reflected in our kind of assessments and our ridders and our assaults, and that's why we put so much effort into understanding that. So that will not surprise members, but will obviously disappoint everyone in the call. Exposure to loss of life, again, is the second highest. And again, we all understand the nature of policing, but it's significant for this profession, as you would imagine. The third category is the category that obviously gives us a real kind of opportunity to lean in, and that's unwanted and unfavourable treatment. And that's something that obviously we will look at, and there's been some independent research done and referenced there by colleagues in the SPA, which is really helpful for us, and that gives us a kind of different lens to start having a look at. And then the last one is car accidents, which again probably doesn't surprise anyone in the call. I think we've got some opportunities from this. I think the look at and the deep dives that very much, there's Jackie Kidd on the call, and I can't take any credit for some of this work. A lot of it's been carried out by her team at the SPA, Hazel Robertson and others. So I don't intend to take credit for it. I'm the one that's privileged to represent the information. But I think there's some really good joint working going on now to kind of really deep dive into understanding this. One of the challenges, obviously, is that a lot of cases can be quite historical in terms of the injury of that. So action now might upstream for committees in 10 and 20 years' time. So that's always going to be a challenge for us. But there are injuries and that happen more concurrently and leads to a more immediate ill health retirement. But that's something else for us to continue to try and strive to understand. But we wouldn't have this level of detail if it wasn't for the time that was taken by colleagues in the SPA to support that kind of deep dive. So I'm very grateful for that. So I'll stop there and take any questions, Chair.
Okay. Paul Eady, you've got your hand up.
I've got a few small questions and then maybe one more deeper one. Firstly, I'd be interested to know, do any of the redeployments, and I know they're very small numbers in what we've got reported to us, but in the past have redeployments subsequently had to retire due to ill health?
Yes, is the short answer, because quite often we're redeploying at a stage where somebody's got a degenerative condition. Right. So they are capable of doing a meaningful budgeted role in policing, with modifications, obviously, but at some stage that reaches a point where that's no longer sustainable. And I mentioned briefly that we've got a process and we're really looking in detail at cases, and we've got a duty modification panel that looks at modifications, and as there's degenerative illnesses, obviously there'll be a build-up of modifications, and at some stage someday will get to potentially the point where they can't do a policing role, and it's for that panel to kind of look at what the options are, where there might be opportunities still to use, because we invest a significant amount in training a police officer, as the committee is aware. So we are always looking for opportunities to ensure that if those skills and experience can be used somewhere else in the organisation and effectively and efficiently to deliver what we would have a potentially fit to our officer in doing anyway, it's in our best interest to be able to continue to use those skills rather than start training again on another individual. But there is a balance to be had, because obviously as enablement reduces with deteriorating conditions, there is a point where it's no longer efficient or effective, or indeed fair, quite often on individuals. And that's where, again, I would point to the Federation and others have helped us with that process in terms of some of the feedback and the dialogue aspects of having those difficult conversations with individuals who are entirely committed to their service, are entirely wanting to continue their careers, but there's a tipping point where we have to say this is no longer working. And they've been very helpful in giving us some good feedback on how we might improve in those messages.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I'm very conscious that policing is a vocation, and it's possibly the most important job someone will have in their life. The next question I've got, because and maybe following up on that, I note that none of the injured on duties seem to have been redeployed. The 22 you've got. So you have 22 injured on duties that have been approved for retiral. Was there ever any scope for any of them to be redeployed? I'm assuming you look at that before putting them forward.
So an injury on duty award is a regulated provision that links with when you take your pension. So that is the reason why those individuals are in that process at that point.
Just the way it's presented. So you've exhausted that possibility by the time you got to that.
Yes.
Another question I've got is, I recall when I was chairing the legal committee, there was a significant waiting time and backlog for ill health retirement. What's the state of play with that now?
So you're absolutely right. And during COVID, obviously, that we had a real challenge with getting SMP time. There's a small number of SMPs across the UK, and all police forces compete for their time, as you can imagine. However, again, in collaboration with other people on this call, certainly in Federation went in quite significantly in this. We managed to streamline aspects of the process, and again, I point to Jackie and team who helped us look for the pinch points and do that. So just now, the timeline around it, during COVID and that, we were getting up to over 12 months, and sometimes there was individual cases that were significantly longer. Now we're on average between 5 and 6. So it is a complete turnaround, and I do appreciate that sounds like a very long period of time, but it is a complex process, and there's several regulatory junctions to it. So it's difficult to compress that any further.
Right. So that was the question I was going to ask. Is there any scope for improvement on that? But it doesn't sound like there is. So well, thanks for those.
I would want to give assurance as well, Paul, that sometimes there's very tragic cases, not often, thank goodness, where somebody's, potentially tracked towards very terminal illness, and there is a lot of pressure on the system. And when we get those isolated cases, we can speak to an SMP, and they will drop everything and help us get that case managed where it is really serious and we're against the clock. Thankfully they are few and far between, but we do have that relationship with Optima to kind of put the foot on the metal. It does mean that somebody has to kind of jump the queue, which is why we don't do it as a matter of course, because that puts just delays in the system in other places, but we can do that where it's really essential to do it.
Well, that's good to hear. The next area I wanted to just probe into a little bit more was the causal analysis as laid out in item 3. I'm looking particularly at the unwanted and unfavourable treatment. So that's kind of covers quite a wide range of aspects, some of which could be of risk to us. So I'm curious what further actions you're going to take in light of what you've found looking into this, particularly preventing and mitigating any risks to the organisation or the occupational factors identified.
So, and that's one of the reasons I made the comment on upstreaming, because sometimes what we are dealing with is events that happened maybe a significant period of time ago, but over a long period of time have eroded the resilience of individuals. So certainly now the work that we've got on values, the work we've got on grievance and positive workplace, and the work we've done in response to the changes to the prevention of harassment for workers provisions will certainly ensure that in terms of the bit we control in terms of workforce and treatment in the workforce, it should be a higher standard than potentially it was or was understood to be in the past. But there's significant work that we would still have to do to try and deep dive into cases, and obviously that's quite laborious because all of this is kind of individual cases. So the work that's referred to in this space is obviously external benchmarking and research as well, rather than that individual kind of do we understand as detailed our own pattern. But the fact that we are now deep diving on a regular basis into this should help us in terms of other matters emerging. But again, I would hope that the work that we've done in positive workplace now would reduce upstream this category in the future. But as I say, a significant element is quite often related to events of the past, and sometimes the significant past as well, which is difficult to manage as well, because even the kind of wider records and reporting isn't always there for us to kind of then analyse from back then, because as you know, there's a retention schedule, and if people haven't reported things, that also makes it difficult for us in terms of analysis. So it's something that we're aware of now, that we have to keep an eye to, and from the knowledge we've got now of it, it will give us opportunities to continue to look at that.
Great. So it sounds like there's a lot more work still to be done. Can you keep the committee updated on this and any ongoing trends and impact as a result of that work?
So I think the intention is now to kind of mainstream the kind of look at ill health, retirement and injury and duty. So we would now be having a wider sight of that on a more regular basis. So I guess the short answer would be yes, that anything else we're doing in this space, we would be putting it in the routine reports.
That's super. Thank you very much, Nikki. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Alistair here.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Again, thanks for the report, Nikki, and we've already covered much on ill health retirement. As you stated, it's life-changing for people, and there's a huge amount of sensitivity around it, and it was good to hear from Rob earlier about the under the circumstances, the positive experience supporting somebody through this process. So I'm just wondering, you know, what have you learned from the positive experiences of people going through this? What have you learned from the less than positive experiences? So what's next for ill health retirement?
So I think, and I'm always reticent to use the word positive, because it's a difficult time in life. So I think what we're gaining from this process is, at a difficult time in life, the process is slow, and what puts a lot of stress on people is that communication. Even the communication to say, there's nothing happened since the last communication, but you're fourth in the queue, or whatever, for SMP appointments, and we're looking at trying to schedule them, and as soon as we've got a date, we'll let you know. Now, just that kind of assurance that somebody is looking out for your interests and trying to support you through it, through a difficult time, is I guess more important to people in some respects than the timelines and that. I think people feel that they're informed, they feel that they've got a better control of it. And obviously it's a time in life when you feel that you're kind of losing control because the organisation is having to progress something you don't. So I think the big challenge in this space is both the timelines, but the bigger challenge is communication, because people will, to a degree, accept if something is taking a bit longer, as long as they are understanding of that. And I think that's where our team is certainly looking at it as kind of case management, looking to advise managers about the importance of that continued engagement, that continued support. Now, I do obviously caveat that with, that depends on the individual. The individual's got to have control over how much communication they want as well, because we have individuals, and the main individuals want communicated on a regular basis, but there are a few that, because of their illnesses, say, I don't want that level of communication. So it's about tailoring to the individual as well. But in the main, it's that continued communication is helpful and supportive of the individual, even if it's not a message they want to hear. And I think pushing our team redesign that you'll be aware of and restructure has a case management structure, and it's certainly our intention going forward to retain that ill health, retirement and case management space. So that means there will be a constant person keeping an eye to it and making sure that management and indeed the P&D team are making sure that they are routinely making sure that contact is on a regular basis where it should be. So I think that will help as well, the new structure. I hope that helped.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, content with that. Angela Leach, please.
Thanks again, Chair. thank you for the report. It was paragraph 4.4 that I wanted to ask a question about. You mentioned that there's been the introduction of new types of support, CBT, EMDR, and that the early data is showing an increase in the uptake, but also recording improved trauma scores. I just wonder if you could maybe expand on how you're measuring the success of these. I'm just conscious that different individuals respond differently to different support mechanisms that are put in place. And I wondered how you're measuring the effectiveness and whether there's any trends in terms of who might benefit most effectively from them.
So again, that's a really good question, and that's what Damien, and I notice he's just put his mic off. That's what Damien's team help us with. So I'll just let him comment on this, if that's okay, Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. We work with our EAP providers on this, and they use a clinical outcomes routine evaluation. It's like an outcomes measure in terms of psychological risk, pre and post any therapy that the individual will go through. They complete a 34-question survey, of which there's a scale that they're given, and that 92% during this time period was that we've seen improved positive scores during that. But that's something that everybody that goes through any type of counselling or therapy through the provider, they complete that clinical outcome, and just gives us a good indication of the effectiveness of people when they get to the therapy itself. So that's something we do throughout the programme.
Thanks for that, Damien. You okay with that, Angela?
Could I just ask if there's any trends coming out in terms of what type of intervention and support is most likely to support the individuals in greatest effect?
Yeah, I think when we were looking at bringing in the new EAP specification, what we had found was that we'd done kind of light touch in terms of the counselling. What we've added to that is our CBT and EMDR, and now we are seeing that these are more effective in terms of the more intensive treatments. What we have within the provider is it's a step care model, so people that may need in the moment support or something more light touch, they can have that. But if it's deemed clinically appropriate in terms of what they require, and it's very much based on the needs of the individual, we can step them up to that more intensive treatment, such as the CBT and EMDR. So this is something that we've already added to the offering from our provider over the last year. So it's absolutely something that we're monitoring, and it seems to be effective at this moment in time, and gives us that opportunity to have a greater offer for our people. So not sure if that answers the question.
Well, that's great. It's really encouraging to see the breadth of support that's offered. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Colleagues, the staff associations are unison. Any questions? Rob?
Thanks very much, Chair. I was just going to say one thing around about the prevalence of police assaults in terms of injury on duty awards. And it's just worth saying, it's worth pointing out that there should never be an expectation that officers are assaulted on duty. That shouldn't be. They shouldn't expect it. Members of the public shouldn't expect it. It's not part of what being a police officer should entail. But as we know, it does happen with an all too alarming and all too increasing frequency. And I know that Alistair, who's here on the committee today, will have heard me say to the Justice Secretary at our conference last week that there should be consideration of disqualifying persons with previous convictions for assaulting police, or persons serving time for assaulting police from early release. And we would ask this committee and the SPA more broadly to give consideration to supporting this position, which would give an absolutely clear message to those who carry out that sort of behaviour, to those who end careers and damage lives, sometimes irreparably, that it will not be tolerated. And I won't speak for David Threadgold, and I know he'll come in and see himself, but certainly from the point of view of officers who've been subjected to that sort of behaviour, I know it would be really welcome amongst them who are mostly our colleagues at federated ranks. Thank you.
I'll bring in. I'll come back to it, Rob, but I'll bring in David Threadgold first.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on Rob's points there, it goes without saying that we support them. And I was over at Northern Ireland's Federation conference, and they gave evidence of the impact of that type of government-led decision in Malta, for example, where police assaults effectively stopped because of the sentences that were, going to be handed out to those who are under, I mean, I look at I thank the comments from the Federation about the support that we provide to officers going through ill health retirement, and I don't know if it's appropriate for me to acknowledge that work from within my own organisation, because the training and the commitment and the time that they take to support, cops who are going through that scenario is almost disproportionate, but clearly it's worth doing. So if I can record my appreciation for my own team, then I will do that if I get the chance, I think there are some opportunities to, if you look at the list, some of them, it's inevitable that cops are going to be assaulted to an extent, but I think there are opportunities within that list for us to be more proactive. And again, I look at the training elements to it. If you look at the data that's provided later on, still 15% of our officers are out of card for officer safety training. Now, I know that there's been a statement that they won't be deployed if you're not in ticket, but if we have that amount of people who are not within ticket, then clearly that puts the demand on those who are to be out there working in the front line. So there is potentially evolution there. I think body-worn video will have an impact. The interactions that we have with the public will change now that we start to see the rollout of that across the country. And again, the evidence that I have from across Europe and the world would suggest that the number of police officer assaults tends to reduce when cops are wearing body-worn video. So I think that will play out, in the next months and years into some of the information that we're seeing. And it was a comment that Nikki made. I'm just going to pick up one about, looking out for each other's interests. I think that is probably key when you look at grievance and workload, which are two of the items on that list. I think that basic contact with either other peers or supervisors is an area where we have real challenge. And I've spoken before about the impact of remote supervision and that psychological and potentially physical impact on our staff when we don't have the ability to engage with others around us. And I think that has been acknowledged by the service, because I've had the conversations with Dep Spears, but it is a real area of challenge for the organisation that I think would play into the type of data that has been reported on here as well. So thanks for the opportunity.
Again, all very valid and important contributions. Can I ask members if you get any reflections or comments you want to ask before I summarise this? Okay. Regarding assaults on police officers or police staff if they're deployed in a situation that puts them up, this committee and the SPA board has been consistent and utterly condemning that, and it's just not acceptable. And the point made from Rob that it's not part of your work is a point we've been making constantly and totally are in unison with you. As to whether, given that statement and agreeing for that call with you, Rob, that would need to come from the SPA board and the engagement with yourself through the SPA officers and the chair in relation to that. So while we can't give you that assurance at this committee, I do want to make that point about condemning any assaults or violence towards people at work. And of course, we would also say that about other blue light services and public workers, or we saw it with the retail sector during COVID, etc. Assault at work is just not acceptable, but particularly for those public servants who go about their day to keep us all safe, and police officers are very much in that category. There's a lot of areas there that this committee will continue to focus on, and will continue to develop the rich data sources around that, allow us to understand it better, and we will continue to encourage and support resourcing those areas that will improve that situation, as we've seen through Optima type interventions, we've seen through the provision of CBT, etc. That will continue to be a focus of this committee. Move on then to the next item. David, you've still got your hand up. Is that a legacy? That's okay. Is the paper 3.1, which is looking at the Q4, which is, of course, is a year-end workforce strategic dashboard. And there's been a lot of work going into this, and again, it's Nikki Page, over to you, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated. I think members are aware that this report is thematic and it's aligned to the kind of 6 outcomes across the people strategy and the strategic workforce plan, but we're also, and this is evolving as members are aware, and it's supported by colleagues down at the SPA and actually colleagues in APU who are working more closely with to understand our data and support the kind of wider principles of how we should present data. But it's also looking at how we can connect into the annual police plan, the people and performance plan, and bring those kind of insights to give member assurance as well. And we are developing it, and there is further work to do, but hopefully it's moving in the right direction as we're working with all those parties to achieve it. So I suppose in terms of just to connect some of the dots around the discussion, it will come as no surprise from this report, absence and wellbeing is a focus, and I think we've had some dialogue on that. And the figures and attendance rates are in the report, and that is obviously a focus for the service. Re-rostered rest days, again, I'm hoping this will give the assurance that the briefing paper on the action also gives about the wider direction, being they are reducing over this period. They were in the previous year 39,261 compared to the current provision of 28,265. So there is a downward trend, but there's still a big focus in that area. Duty modifications, it's really relevant to point that out because Paul raised that kind of, what is the pattern? Duty modifications is rising. We do have an ageing workforce. We do have, obviously, and we've talked about officer assaults and all these things that lead to modifications. So we look at, when we have to adjust, there's patterns in terms of RIDDR and assaults there as well. There has been a rise in non-deployability, but the push for us and our team and the work of the duty modification panel is to ensure that if there are modifications required, we're getting people into roles that ensure that they are sitting in budgeted, meaningful work, and if they are not capable of that, we are obviously moving into that health retirement process as well. So it's just to give some assurances on that. I think Damien's already spoke about the absence pattern and the psychological disorder and the kind of engagement with EAP and the kind of 86% positive improvement after that. So that's something that we will continue to push so that we can affect that form of absence and getting people the support as early a juncture as they can. I think David already mentioned OST and out of card. While the figure has fallen, it is 15%. He's right to point that out, and that's something again that we are pushing heavily in the force mobilisation model as well. It relies on people being in card, so that is something that we're putting a lot of concentration in. And even from last quarter, there has been a 5% drop in the pattern there, but it's something that we're continuing to focus on with colleagues from LTD. And lastly, there's information and grievance there. Members will be aware that there's a lot of work ongoing in this space. We've built the mediation services. We are seeing a rise in the uptake of that and people being more willing to look at relationships that are maybe not as positive as they should be at a local level and actually proactively deal with that. I think that's a positive, but I think it's something that we're going to have to continue to develop the trust and confidence in that system and ensure that culturally people feel that they've got ownership of professional relationships, because the organisation can put mechanisms in place, but we need people to also want to improve relationships where they are breaking down with colleagues for whatever reason and commit to those professional relationships getting better. And that's an area that we're looking at, how we can encourage a higher uptake even than we're seeing in that improved figure going into mediation, but how we might also do more work to give people confidence in that so that it becomes a default position. So That's probably the points I wanted to pull out, Chair. I'm sure there'll be member questions, so I'll stop there.
Sure, I'm sure there will be member questions. Before we go there, you referenced it, and I want to acknowledge that there was a board action, the last SPA board raised after members' questions around part-time flexible working. And during discussion at that meeting in March, information was requested to provide assurance in respect to flexible working arrangements. Now, we know that a short life working group has now been stood up reporting to the Director of People and Development, which will assess the current effectiveness of flexible working guides in practice and identifying the areas to strengthen and understanding of the based on the evidence and database and showing the opportunities for improvement. While that group will provide recommendations to senior management, I would like to acknowledge and will raise an action, taking it from the board into the work of this committee. We will raise an action for a specific report on that and an update on the recommendations that are coming from that short life working group, so that we can be assured at this level in order to go back to the board and give, because I suppose the heavy lifting of this will be done in this committee rather than the full board. So I think it's appropriate at this point before we move it on, because you may get questions around that, but there will be a specific formal action on that. On that basis, can I ask members if you've any to ask your questions now? Angela, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, Nikki. Another really full report. I've got two questions. One relates to what we've already discussed, partly anyway, in relation to CBT, EMDR, but a wider question. So the report demonstrates that there is a continuing increase in psychological illness, and that's causing absence. And it's a trend that's increasing, although there was a short-term decrease of 0.2% in the last quarter. I just wondered, though, from the intelligence, and it's not something that's peculiar to Police Scotland, I just wondered, from all the good work that you're doing in this area, is there any further action that's in the pipeline that the committee might be interested in? And as I say, I've got one more question.
So in terms of further action, we're doing a mapping process, as is in the wellbeing paper, around kind of the wellbeing, the suicide prevention, all of those sort of things. So we are looking to get into far more the prevent space, and all our kind of action is gearing up to that kind of earlier intervention, pushing services around mental health, making them far more accessible. Also dealing with kind of, I suppose, cultural aspects that happen in workforces, between people not wanting to access services, not wanting to be vulnerable. So I think there's cultural aspects to the service we offer as well, that the more we normalise the fact that people access these services and access them all the time, and the more we normalise the fact that people see improvement, so we get that message out to the workforce that 86% of people, most people benefit from it. Now, it's not for everyone, I'm not stressing it. There's different support mechanisms that work across different personality types and different, but there is an element of the more people we can get to access the service in the first instance, the more likely we are to see positive change. We know also that, generally speaking, mental health services within the NHS are not quick. It's taken on average, I think, about 2 years at the moment for people to get support outside work for mental health services, and there will be people trying to use that route because that's the most appropriate route for them given what they are experiencing. So there are barriers as well outside policing for us dealing with it, but I think for us the concentration on, we've got those services in place, we have to make them more accessible, and we have to encourage the workforce to use them when they need them, and that is a cultural thing that we will continue to address. So I think there's a lot of moving parts. Damien's obviously doing a lot of the work, and there is, as you'll see from the report, prevent work and train, and the suicide action plan side of it will be the next big thing for us. But hopefully I think we've captured and we've got a good provision, baseline provision in place for our workforce, and it's about accessibility. So I'll stop in case Damien wants to add anything, because I'm sure he will.
No, thank you, Nikki. I think you've summed it up in terms of what we're trying to do here is to look more in the preventative and the mitigate space, because I think it's very much, when we talk about the percentage of people that access CBT, EMDR, etc., that's people that have now reached out for support. I think for us is we want to really get an earlier stage on that curve where we're preventing people going absent, for example. I think if we have a model that we always wait for people to seek out that help, we're only going to ever help so many people. So for us, it's really important. I think there's a variety of ways that within the action plan we can do that. Obviously, there's communication, engagement, breaking down stigma, in making sure that our organisation is more mentally health informed in terms of themselves and how they can support others. But I think there's also work that we can do in terms of our systems and the data that we hold as well, that whenever we see that maybe an individual has experienced trauma or repeated trauma over a period of time, is we're making proactive approaches to those individuals to offer support or a conversation, etc. That we're not waiting for an issue to arise or a problem to arise till it gets to a certain extent that it's then something we need to support or treat in that aspect. So I think it's an organisational approach that we need to take rather than just being within health and wellbeing, and we need to utilise all of different aspects of systems, policies, looking at our approaches to data, etc., to try and ensure that we're supporting our people as best we can to get them earlier on that curve rather than waiting for them to seek that support.
Thanks, David. Angela?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely great to hear that connection and the interdependencies. Couldn't agree more that it is a kind of whole systems approach that needs to be taken to this. And in that respect, it leads me into my other question, because again, I thought that it was really encouraging to see the results from your leadership matters, which obviously is the fundamental part of making sure that you've got the competence and the capability within the workforce to deal with these types of issues. And also the feedback on the police management development programme, because all of that will help support officers and staff much more effectively in the course of their work. My question is though on My Career, and you mentioned that this work is being stalled a bit, but you do intend to bring forward a decision on the future of My Career in Q1, which will end next month, in fact. Can I just ask for a bit more information on that? I'm sorry, Tom, if this is something that other board members know, but I'm just curious about this, given the importance of it within the wider HR system. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. So My Career, and just to give you a bit of background, because you may or may not be familiar with how we use it in policing. Certainly My Career has the opportunity to put reflection logs in that, and those be used in the application for promotion for certainly police officers. So the tool over a period of time, we see that those that are seeking promotion are more interested in using My Career than those maybe our average member of the workforce who might be saying, well, I'm not seeking promotion, so I'm not going to put as much effort into that. Now that for us is not where we want that system to be. As you can imagine, we want everyone to engage on where they're at, how their career's going, what development opportunities might be coming up. We need to understand that far better. So while My Career has certainly had a place and allowed us to change our our current system and how we respond to promotion, I think there's elements in it that aren't working for the organisation, and that is why we've said we have to think around about what the organisation needs by way of kind of performance and the drive into that space, how we manage individual performance, and how we separate different things out so that discussion with individuals on career doesn't become just about promotion. And that's where we are reflecting on our learning from the system. It was brought in for a lot of good reasons at the time, but when we were reflecting on our learning from it, we are seeing that there's patterns that just aren't supporting the organisation in terms of where we're at now and what our focus should be in terms of workforce going forward. So that's the reason that we're saying, right, we need to review this and we need to say, right, what are we looking to achieve from that kind of system, that engagement with the workforce? What should my career replacement be, and what shouldn't it be, so as that we are using whatever, I'll use my career just now, we are using that system to support the organisation in terms of the people strategy. You know, so we use it as a tool that drives a good culture and a good set of behaviours. So, and I think, you know, when we developed my career, we weren't as developed in terms of things like people strategy, and that's evolved and got far more mature since then. So this gives us a renewed opportunity when we look at my career as to where are we at with the people agenda, and what should we be driving therefore from direct engagement with the workforce on a regular basis. So I hope that gives you a wee bit of history, but also gives you the assurance of why we're looking at it and why it's important.
Yeah, thank you. I would wholeheartedly agree, because early identification of things like training and development needs or any other particular needs of an individual feeds into some of the other discussion that we've had about psychological or other illness. So it's an important part of the toolbox, I would suggest. But thank you.
Thanks. Alistair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report, Nikki. There is a lot in this report. I've got 3 questions at this stage, if that's okay. First question is in relation to officer safety training. It's already been referenced that there's 15% that are out of ticket, if that's the right expression. But there's progress. It's been a big focus within Police Scotland, so that's encouraging. There'll be a percentage of that 15% that are, you know, unable to attend the training, you know, perhaps because they're going through a period of ill health, etc. So just wondered what the breakdown on that was. The other question I have around this is, when do we expect actually for, other than those that can't do it for legitimate reasons, to be in a position where everybody is ready to deploy? And then the final bit on that is about withdrawing people's authority to deploy. As that actually happens, and what are the implications of that? So that's probably about 3 questions within one question, but I've got another couple of questions to follow up on afterwards.
No, you're making a really good observation, because as you rightly point out, there is a number of people that, because of their modification or because of, and it's within the paper, you will see that there's people in recuperative duties as well.
Yeah.
Quite often somebody that's recuperating from an injury obviously can't attend OST, and that they're not getting deployed at that period as well because they're recuperating from an injury. So we are never going to have 100%.
Yeah.
Never. And as it sits just now, you will see from the figures in modified. Now, what I don't want to do is confuse modified with non-deployable, because it's not a non-deployable figure. But within modifications, you get recuperative, you get people who are in protected duties. So, for example, there's individuals that are pregnant. So they are, at that time, are not going to be going through OST for obvious reasons. You then have people who are non-deployable because of restrictions on them, because of maybe an investigation, and again, they're not going to be put out to the front line, so they are secondary in terms of the people we'd look to train in that space. And that's not to say that they're any less important or anything else, but obviously if you've got 3 people that you can put out tomorrow and they're all waiting for training and somebody you can't, you're always going to prioritise those that you can. And then there is the modified. Now, we've never broke down, to the best of my knowledge, because the system, I don't think it makes it easy to do this, the connection between modified and OST. I can go away and investigate if we can do links based on adjustments, but in the adjustment field on scope that might say you can't do OST is a free text one. So that means it's difficult to analyse. So there's an absolute correlation, I can assure you of that, because we know that from kind of anecdotal, and you know, it's obvious as well that if you're recovering from an injury, you're not going to be able to do something maybe as physical as OST. But the direct correlation of it and how easy it would be to establish that, I think it would be quite difficult with our current systems. But I will go away and make inquiry to see if we can find some way to give you a better indication to answer that question.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I don't want to give too much work, but it's so that we've got an understanding of when we've optimised it and everybody that can be has completed the training. Implications of somebody having an authority to deploy withdrawn?
Obviously, there's a, just for assurance as well, the category for, you know, non-deployable related to investigation, it's a tiny minority of the numbers we're talking about. As you might anticipate, my colleagues in PSD would immediately be able to give the figure straight off their head, but I am not able to do that. But that is a figure that, you know, is small in the wider proportion. The vast majority of people that are not out in the street is because they're recuperating from an injury. You've seen officer assaults and that. Unfortunately, that does lead to non-deployability, and those with modifications that mean maybe they won't ill health retire, but they will go into a role and quite often cannot do OST as a consequence of that. But I will do what I can, Alistair, to see if we can do some work around what that picture might look like. I can't promise you an absolute A to Z explanation, but if we can do some work to see what we can do in terms of indicators, I'll certainly take that on.
I mean, what's been clear in your answer there to Alistair is that the issues being raised are in your thinking and when you're making your professional judgments. It's whether we've got a data set that's rich enough at this time to give us that analysis. But we will raise an action, Nikki, for that to be explored and report back to us. And if it goes back, it's not there, but they get that professional assurance. And then what we'll be looking for is assurance that will be built into a future spec in terms of data going forward. Is that okay, Alistair?
Yeah, that's very helpful, Tom. Thank you.
Have you got further points to raise?
I do.
Yes. Carry on.
Okay. My second question was in relation to, and you've covered much of this already. It's encouraging, you know, in terms of modifications, that work goes on to make sure that everybody's given a role that is meaningful and supportive of them. But it's quite a significant number across the organisation, both within police officers and within police staff. And you touched on forced mobilisation there and the impact that modifications can have on the forced mobilisation model. So just wondering what the considerations, if any, are in relation to the numbers of people that are on modified duties and the potential impact that has on mobilisation across the force.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of modified, and again, there are people that are modified that are fully deployable, just to be clear. So in terms of how we deal with modifying just now, as members will be aware, the provision of the Equality Acts mean we have to look at any individual disability, individual modifications and reasonable adjustments, and what their capability for role is as a consequence of that. So what we have got in place is a process that allows local divisions in the first instance to say, can this person with their modification be used at a local level? Because that creates less disruption for the individual and ensures that the division's been effective and efficient in terms of deployment of that individual. If they can absorb and put that into, individual must be put into a budgeted, established post that they can do with those modifications. Now, at a local level, what's happening is we're seeing saturation in local areas saying we can no longer absorb this, so we need this individual to be considered by the wider organisation, whether there's anything suitable within the organisation, so that we meet our requirements of the Equality Act to look at all opportunities that might exist before we obviously go down a route of potentially terminating somebody's employment through either ill health retirement or capability regulation. So the Duty Modification Panel has reports that say this is what the individual can do, this is what the individual can't do, and we look at all our budgeted vacancies with a view of saying, if the individual can do a budgeted vacancy that we would have somebody sitting in anyway, then we will accommodate that individual in their adjustments. If we can't, there is no creating, supernumerary posts or anything like that for an individual. They have to go down either a capability or an ill health retirement route. So that system's in place. There is individuals that we've already had to push down an ill health retirement route because of the level of adjustment they need. We can't accommodate it. There's equally individuals that we are able to deploy and use their warranted experience and maybe 20, 25 years of really good experience in a different area of business that they might not have even thought about before that process. But it's all down to, does the organisation need those skills? Can the individual still do a budgeted role? And will it be efficient and effective for the system to make that happen? So it's not a straightforward, the next person, we can't absorb. It has to be an individual look to comply with the Equality Act, and that means that some people are successful and being redeployed and others aren't. And the numbers that have come forward to that panel from divisions in the kind of last 12-month period are around about 120 that divisions are saying, we can no longer absorb this person's adjustment, you'll have to find them something elsewhere in the organisation. So hopefully that gives you assurance we've got quite a significant process around managing that. Is there going to be a tipping point where we can no longer absorb? Well, again, it's really difficult to say there's going to be a tipping point because you're always going to have to look at the individual to be compliant with the Equality Act.
That's very helpful, Nikki. I appreciate it. And it puts my mind slightly towards geography and different parts of the country, but I think we could explore that at some future point. Because you wouldn't want to see anybody disadvantaged compared to colleagues in other parts of the country disproportionately. So one final question, Chair, from me, if you don't mind, it's in relation to special constables. I did raise it at the board, and the Chief Constable spoke very positively about special constables and their role within Police Scotland and their role going forward in Vision 2030. It looks like we're fairly static on numbers with special constables. And I know there was an initial review in everybody's position when Police Scotland formed. But I wonder what the thoughts are going forward in terms of encouraging more people to become special constables. Volunteering is good for the organisation. Volunteering is good for individuals. You know, all of that type of stuff. So just wondered what the thoughts on that were going forward.
So we do have a special constable coordinator who obviously is obsessive about attracting and pulling people in. What I would say is the figures do look static, but it's maybe a wee bit deceiving insofar as quite often people join us as a special constable to get experience to apply for the role.
Yeah.
So as much as the figures appear static, what we are almost with every intake, we are stealing people from that cadre, and the special constable coordinator is then working to kind of keep that cadre as it is. So I wouldn't want anyone to look at that and think that's stationary, because it's not. And it's actually one of the big benefits for us as an organisation is that, dare I say it, try before you buy. The fact that individuals come in and they have a really good idea of whether the job's for them or not, because they've actually been out there, they've seen what it is really like in practice, and say, yeah, this is for me or not. So that's really important to us as well, because if somebody's coming in assuming what the job's going to be like, we can give them a lot of information, but there's nothing quite like the lived experience. And recruitment, as much as they steal from the special constable cadre on a routine basis, they equally, if somebody maybe comes and is thinking about policing, but maybe doesn't quite have the experience as yet to be successful through the process, they will push them to the special constable route as well and say, have you thought about becoming a special constable and seeing if this job's for you? And if it is, come back to us. If it's not, then that's fine as well. So it does go round and roundabouts and that, but I would say it's a really important tool as well for us in terms of that kind of attract strategy.
Okay, thank you, Nikki.
Thanks for that, Alistair. I advocate that the issue about special constables is so important that it's got a relevance to the Policing Performance Committee as well, and maybe the further discussion there around how that's deployed. Okay, can I offer questions, reflections at this point to our colleagues from staff associations and Unison? David Malcolm from Unison.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back briefly, just to make an observation over the people with, seeking help for ill health and mental health conditions. That stigma still very much lies, for people approaching that, and it is a cultural thing. It's not just a police cultural issue. It's a societal cultural issue. So it's not something that I would expect the police service itself will actually be able to overcome, because people are often wrongly maligned and treated differently because of that, and overlooked for promotion and find difficulty in engaging with work, which then leads to people being hesitant to actually engage and use our services and come forward and say things. And I still find that very much the lived experience to members. And I just wanted to make a comment as well on the my career. The various people boards across the organisation have all flagged up the very low engagement of police staff in my career, principally because it wasn't designed with staff in mind, but it always reflects on the fact that there is such a limited career path progression for staff. So a lot of people don't find out. Obviously, my career isn't supposed to be about career progression, and many people will tell me that when I raise this, but it is principally what it gets used for. It is principally what people understand it for. So it then leads to them lacking, in wanting to engage with it at all. I just wanted to make those observations, Chair.
Very fair points, David. I'll reflect on that in my own comments at the end. Can we go then to Rob Hay?
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly to your discussion around about OST and the figures for officers who are restricted or sick or otherwise injured. I think that's a discussion that we've had before in this committee, and I think that the data presented might actually take account for that. I stand to be corrected on that, but I do think that data might already have been adjusted for that for presentation here. And to the question about the implication of that, obviously 15% of officers were undeployable. That feels like it could have some really significant implications. The reassurance I would give the committee, however, is that those 15% are distributed across a range of different departments in the force. So, for my colleagues who are divisional commanders, we would be significantly concerned if 15% of our response and community officers were not deployable, but actually some of that 15% are in roles where they don't typically operationally deploy in any case. So we absolutely want that number to be as close to 100% as it can be, without recognising that it will probably never get there. But there are ways that individuals in senior command are actively managing and do actively manage officers who are not deployable in respect of OST, which is I think is something that you can take some reassurance from. And I guess the only other thing I would say, I would encourage, Nikki mentioned the force mobilisation model in the context of OST. I would encourage the committee to assure itself that there's a robust plan in place for any associated drop in training output as a result of the force mobilisation model. Because we know that sticking with the example of OST, it's the highest volume face-to-face training activity Police Scotland undertakes, and it's absolutely essential to our ability to provide basic operational service delivery. So if the trainers who deliver that are to be deployed in operations to support frontline policing, it means there's likely to be an associated drop in training output. So there needs to be a plan to manage that in a way that doesn't, then some months down the line actually send the rates of out of card to unsustainable levels.
That's a very important point that you make there, Rob. We will actually ask for a specific action to be raised to the force to give us an update on the impact of force mobilisation on specialist departments and outputs like officer safety training, etc., and the assurance around that. So we'll know that. Can I come now, David? David Threadgill.
Thank you, Chair. Just to fully endorse the point you just made about the impact on training and specialist department, and that is going to be a key outcome for the force mobilisation model. But my first point there was largely what David Malcolm said there, and around my career, and just my own understanding of it. And if it's not where it needs to be, then please be corrected. But my understanding of that is that it is not, as it is recorded in the documents here, a performance appraisal system. And if it is, if that's certainly, Nick, if that's what you think that it is, then that is not my understanding of it. And it's certainly not the perception that I understand that operational officers have of my career, was the first point. The second one was something that Damien said around culture. I absolutely agree that we have got to be more preventative, and I think that we all do. The biggest challenge I think we have organisationally is how do we achieve that, and how do we create the engagement between, and I've made this point already, but it's relevant again here, between peers, between supervisors, meaningfully to be preventative in that space. Something just as simple as noticing a difference in behaviour. We at the moment are far too reactive, and a lot of the measures and things that have been put in place are reactions. They're not proactive measures. We all know that it needs to be done, but it was just to highlight how much work we have to do. And again, I will say remote supervision is a thing, because this is going to really damage our ability to deliver on what we're talking about in the more remote and rural areas across Scotland, because of the systems that are evolving at the moment. And lastly, it was more of a direct question, Nicky, around something that's in the strategic dashboard around the exit surveys, and it's framed around the work that I know that is going on to be really proactive and to change the way that we're trying to recruit people into the organisation. And I'm sure those on the call know that there's potentially 3,700 of us can leave in the next 4 years, and the impact that could have. And my question was, and it's one of the points on the dashboard around the exit survey. And again, it's not specific, or doesn't make the distinction between cops and support staff, but it says that only 39% of leavers complete that survey. And I wonder whether you felt that there was an opportunity there to have a better understanding of why people are leaving the organisation, to perhaps inform what we do at the front end and, you know, adapt some of the things that we're talking about here to address the information that we're missing if less than 4 in 10 are doing that type of work. I appreciate it's voluntary. Thank you.
Can I offer, Nikki, are you able to give a quick reflection on that?
Yeah. And I suppose what I would point out is that there is no levels of completion, although from an industry standard rate, they're broadly average. The observation I would make is that a big indicator in terms of exit and whether people are exiting the organisation because they don't want to be there is obviously that turnover rate. And if you look at the rate of turnover in policing and in Police Scotland as well, it's a historic low, and it is significantly lower than other industries. If you look at the NHS, if you look at other kind of industries at all that are seen as vocations and careers, we have got extremely low turnover. Now that 100% should never make us complacent, and it shouldn't be used as the only indicator to say, well, is it good, bad, or indifferent? However, what I would say is that if we are, as we are looking at all our data and remanaging it and relooking at where we need to focus our attentions, it will certainly be scooped up in that wider review to say, what can we learn from this? How are we using the data? But what I would point out is we've got many areas of development of data that we really need to understand to assist the organisation in improvement. And while our turnover rates are so low, and we've got other temperature checks like staff survey and that actually give us quite a lot of detail and dare I say, but we've got higher rates of filling out as well. There's an element of we've got other mechanisms to kind of try and understand our lived experience of our workforce over and above exit interview. And I think as we develop our data, we will look at that, but it will not be as high a priority as things like we've discussed. I mean, Alistair obviously pointed out that kind of modified fees, OST, and that there's things like that we would want to get in and around about and kind of prioritise the development of before it. So it's not important, but it's probably in the grand scheme of everything we've got to do in the data front further down the list, just to manage the expectations. Yeah,
I'm conscious of the time. The point's been made. It's certainly in the consciousness, and we'll be focused on the reasons why people leave the organisation.
Yeah.
Rob, can I come to you for a short intervention, hopefully, because we've got to go through the agenda.
Absolutely, Chair. Yeah, very quickly. I read last week, I believe, might have been in the Daily Telegraph, that there'd been a 100% increase in officers leaving with 4 or 5 years service. So that sounds like an interesting trend and one that would be concerning to the committee and something that's worth looking at going forward, just simply to make that point.
Yeah, the leaders. So there's been a rich discussion in this item, has been apparent as well. There's a couple of things. I don't intend raising loads of actions here, but I do want to raise a couple of things, and it will go in the note of the meeting, so you know it's important going forward. It's probably more in relation to the professional data, the dashboards as we develop that. So areas around the workforce profile by protected characteristics are not apparent in the reports to the committee today, but obviously they're published in line with public body duties. So the data is there. We would like to see that richness coming in, and those characteristics are important. Year-on-year trend analysis, so seeing those trends that we've been talking about, and also looking at a lot will naturally focus on the role of the police officer, but the police staff are really important as well. So starting to give us some data, splitting that data, so we know the impacts on police staff as well. So as I say, I'm not going to put that, because this is, as I've talked earlier, it's almost like the drip and tap. We continually improve, but those are areas that are our requirements for this committee that we would like to see develop. Nikki, if you could take a note of that.
I will, and as you're aware, Chair, the restructure means that we will have a small team, and I do say small, but it's not something we've had before, that will look at our data and try and develop more in this space. So I think that's going to help us tremendously, and we have appointed the head of in that area, and we're looking to recruit the posts to support. So hopefully we'll get a bit of pace round about it once those posts are in place, and we've got a chance to kind of get some resources to look at it.
You understand where we're coming from.
Absolutely.
Can we go then to item 3.2, which is a policy assurance update? And we seem to be relying heavily on a certain Nikki Page in this meeting.
I know, I'm just sitting thinking to myself, Katie took an annual leave day off, and I'm starting to now think she might have planned her time in. No, I jest. So this is hopefully quite a quick one, because I think members are aware now of this paper, and it's really an assurance paper. It's there to just give a flavour of what we've been working on. And again, members are aware that we do this absolutely in collaboration with colleagues on this call who put as much work into it as our team. So Federation colleagues, union colleagues, ASPS colleagues, etc., who work with us on the consultation of all our policy and procedure and who've fed into this. A lot of what we've done, again, is in relation to fair work, which will come as no surprise. The procedures that we've looked at in 24-25 have been around change, where colleagues in the trade union have been heavily involved with flexible working as it relates to staff, allowances and expenses. The list is there. They're varied. They cross both officer relevant, staff relevant and workforce relevant. But I think members will see the linkage to fair work, to legislative changes, and what I would say is it is a very collaborative activity. The other thing is the model that we've put in place that allows us to change, look at legislation and prioritise better, definitely paying off now. It's helpful, and it allows us to have discussions that are more informed with colleagues in the staff associations and trade unions when we do shuffle things about to say, well, that legislation's coming, so that's why we're changing the order of things. It will come as no surprise that on our next list of priorities that's also informed by changes both inside and outside policing, but the transitioning at workshop, for example, will be in our next look at, which will come as no surprise given the Supreme Court judgment. So it's just to give assurances that we are constantly environmentally scanning, using that decision-making model, putting relevant information into it and shuffling as we need. So I will leave it there because I think members are probably well aware of kind of the history to all of this, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Paul, Edith.
Just trying to unmute there without success. Thanks for that, Nikki. Thanks, Chair. I've got just 3 quick questions on the key activities. So the first is the equality, diversity and dignity. I mean, you make reference in the report to it neither being a policy or a procedure. My notes have scribbled ouch, because that sounds quite damning. I'm curious, when are we going to see either a policy or a procedure or both, and when are we likely to see that?
Yes, so in terms of that, this is a bit of a kind of throwback, because when we got all our documents when we came together, there was a variety of different documents, and we've cut them all down and moved to express things, but we've never thrown something away where it's had a place. So our intention would be to look at that document and develop it into, dare I say, but it's probably going to end up in into various more precise documents that tackle issues in more detail. So my view on it would be we will end up with the creation of several SOPs as a consequence of that one document. And the other thing, and again, just to give you assurance, so the provision in terms of disability, again, we've been developing our duty modification process and all the documentation around that. So we have now got better systems in place that are more deep and respond to the requirements we have related to modifications in the policing environment and all that. So with deeper dive into them, it would be the intention to get rid of some of these documents and replace them, both within current procedure, I hasten to say, by building that out, but there will be a requirement to produce other documents as well.
And do you know roughly when, ballpark, that's likely to conclude?
So at the moment, we've got the plan for next year, so that will address some of it, but those are 2 priority documents for us to look at. So I would be intending to bring updates back on reports, and I will pick that up as we tackle those 2.
Okay, that's great, thanks. And the second one is disability and employment. Again, that seems to be in progress.
Yeah.
Is there any light at the end of the tunnel with that?
Yes, and that's why I said those 2, because that is one, and that is one where, again, we are looking at having provisions within some of our current attendance and that, so it won't be as straightforward as everything going into a SOP. There will be certain things going into other relevant procedures, so that we streamline the whole environment and we're not creating any duplication.
Great, thanks for that. 2.4, uniform and appearance. I note that there's been a paper submitted to Policing Together, and it says here to better inform the executive. That obviously that's Police Scotland's executive. When can we see some indication and what ultimately is going to happen here? Are we going to have a new modern design for police officers' uniforms? It's and roughly when can we expect to see that?
So that paper's working up through the governance process at the moment. I don't have on me what the dates of that are, but I'll be happy to go away, get that off table and make sure that I get that down to you in terms of a timeline.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other areas at this stage? Okay. Obviously the work around the Supreme Court judgment, you've referenced it, Nikki, is of extreme importance to this committee. And can we ask for an actual written update on that for the next committee meeting, please? Put that as an action. I would expect that will be work that's ongoing, so it's not really onerous additional work. It's really making sure that we are properly reflected in those considerations.
I'm taking that down as an action, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Nikki. Right, can I ask for any brief interventions on this area from staff or unions? It's not compulsory. If you have any points, okay, we'll move on if you don't mind. We then move to item 3.3, the strategic workforce plans, the year 1 closure report, Nikki.
Yep, and I think thankfully, Chair, we've probably covered a lot in the dialogue, so you have less narrative from me on this one. But I think it's all there. We've got a lot in terms of the wellbeing side on track, confident leaders. We've all spoke about my career, so everybody's aware that that review is coming, but it's slightly off track at the moment. So that would have been what I had pulled out just to make members aware of that. And I think apart from that, that's kind of highlights that I would immediately point to. I think broadly speaking, most things are on track or have been delivered that were anticipated, but they are those areas in regards to we've had gaps, as people are aware, within leadership, our leadership kind of team, which has put a couple of things further down the track, but we've got plans in place to pull that all back up, so we're confident that we will. And that's the kind of only thing I would say, and I'll open up to questions.
Okay, can I offer it for questions just now? I've got a couple of points I want to raise myself, but I'll offer it first for any questions from members. Angela?
So, thanks, Nikki. There's a lot in this report, and I would profess to be familiar with it and understand it. So, but one area I'm particularly interested in is the strategic workforce plan. And from the slides that you've got there, there's obviously a lot of work that's underway. So I just wonder what the estimated timescale is for the refresh, for the update. And I'm wondering, just a bit of reflection on the plan that you're working to just now, whether the detail that you had was necessary. And I say that because my own experience is that the longer you spend going drilling into the detail of it, the less time you've really got to focus in on the implementation of some of the key aspects of workforce planning and development that you really want to get on with. So I just wondered whether or not, what learning have we taken from the first iteration into the second, and is there an approach that ensures that we've got sufficient information to set out the direction of the workforce, the shape of the workforce, and how that might move over a period of time, you know, with a reference to the vision, the police vision, and what that might mean for competencies, as well as the capabilities, the skills and the experience that are articulated in the plan. I wasn't quite sure that I saw anything on competencies or behaviours that the service is looking for.
So, yeah. So in terms of our competencies and behaviours, we've just done a piece of work and we are pushing up through the system as well. We currently use the College of Policing Competency and Values Framework. They have recently refreshed that, and the plan is to adopt the new Competency and Values Framework. There's also a separate piece of work on profiles within policing ongoing at the moment. We are working with Skills for Justice with a view of getting to a stage where we will have a suite of police officer profiles. We're also working with Skills for Justice, and part of that work is an analytical tool. Now that will help us greatly in terms of one of the things that you spoke about there was that kind of, for want of a better expression, that blended workforce, we understand the direction of travel, who should be doing what, when we're deploying warranted powers. And that tool will, or should, it's in development just now, have the capacity to assist us in answering that question, which will also help us, therefore, with that journey towards blended workforce, right skills, right place, right time, because we will at that point in time, for the first time, have the CVF, the profiles and the tool in place. Now, there's a lot of work, obviously, to embed a new CVF, because it's got to go through all our documents, and we've got to reassess and we've got to look at every profile as we bring it in and align it with that. We've already got staff profiles related to CVF, so they'll all have to be redone as part of this process. So there's significant individual parts that underpin this work and are significant in underpinning this work that are all getting focused on just now. And that should, and we should be able to demonstrate to members that those will help us considerably in terms of that tools that underpin the strategic workforce plan and help us to describe to other parties why we've got certain resources in certain places and why we're building certain skills as well. So I hope that gives some assurance that there's an awful lot of kind of underpinning work going on at the moment.
And what is the timescale then, Nikki?
So certainly in terms of the officer profile work, I've hopefully in the next week got a meeting with Skills for Justice to understand when we can deploy that tool and when we can put all the information we've got into it. So we'll have a definitive for when we might have the officer profiles. In terms of the My Career, obviously that's off track at the moment in regards to that tool, which is part of this, but the other component part is the CVF, and that's certainly been approved. So we're starting to work with College of Policing around about what that will mean for us and look at our document set.
Thank you.
I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Alistair? Alistair here.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. First thing, Nikki, is to commend the team on the amount of work that you've got through in the last 12 months. It is really significant. So an appreciation. You've mentioned a couple of times just through the flow of today's conversation, and I appreciate you being in the hot seat today. You know, capacity issues. You know, so getting that much work done within, you know, the capacity that they have. And there's also capability issues, because you've got to think about the skill sets that are required across the organisation and attracting them into the organisation, retaining them, you know, within the organisation. And so my first question really is about the confidence going forward that you're going to continue to deliver at this, you know, high level that you're doing, this high volume of work. What's the thought being given to that? And there's a couple of things slipped, you know, noticeably things like, you know, scoping the career path for staff. You know, that slipped within it, and also the work on flexible working. I know there's a short life group being set up, as commented earlier. So what's the thoughts on catching up on the stuff that slips as you move forward, you know, with new actions coming in as we go forward? And then my final question is just, you know, how do you reassure yourself that this is all aligned to delivering Vision 2030?
So thanks for that, and I will pass that praise back to the team, because obviously they on a day-to-day basis do the hard work. Yeah. In terms of the kind of confidence around capacity and capability, absolutely, I would say that our structure that has served us to allow us to deliver for probably since inception hasn't changed overly much in that period of time. But Katie and a redesign of the structure has really focused on what is it that's important to the organisation, what are the priorities, and how do we, because we understand that resources are tight across the whole organisation. HR over that time period has cut resources in the same way as every area of policing has, but the Chief Constable has committed to us a significant part of the budget, so that we can look at resources and we can look at pointing them towards, in the new structure, our force priorities. This will mean that our resources are far better aligned to what we're trying to deliver than they currently have been to date. So I think that's going to put us in a better position to deliver than we're currently in. And I would be very optimistic that as the structure is put in place and we've got all those posts filled, because that's one of the issues just now. There's a tremendous amount of movement across the department, as you'll appreciate. Once that's settled and once that's embedded in, members will start to see the difference, particularly in areas like data, strategic workforce planning, and that kind of leadership space as well. So hopefully that gives you some comfort that we are absolutely doing all this with that in mind.
Yeah, so I think that answers the questions that I put to you. So thank you for that, Nikki.
Yeah. Can I offer it to colleagues from Staff Association unions? If there's anything. Okay. I've no doubt the other members will endorse what Alistair said about the amount of work ongoing there in the team, and please do pass on the committee's appreciation for that. But you know, the stuff around this that we've referred to in the conversation, but just so that we're putting down the flag what we want to see coming forward, and is the reiteration of the strategic workforce planning, the, you know, the year 2 actions with that. Things around there, around the the shape, the annual shape and movement in the workforce, etc. So these trends, which as I understand are universal across England and Wales in terms of reporting. So those are the things that, in terms of that workforce plan, we want to see coming forward. There's already a couple of actions that we've postponed going in the reset around the combined learning and development report, which I know is coming in August, and as I said, the year 2 delivery plan. So August would be important for them. They would expect to see that, otherwise they're off track. Thanks very much indeed for that. Colleagues, are you content to press on with this bit of the agenda, or do you want a comfort break for 5 minutes? I'll call a comfort break for 5 minutes like this, and then we'll, but rather than a refreshment break, so we can just push through the agenda. That's okay. Put your videos off. So I'll reconvene the meeting of the People Committee, and we then move to item 4.1, which is the Q4 Health and Safety Report. And grateful to Don McLean, the Health and Safety Manager from Police Scotland, who's going to present this paper. Don, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and please allow me to acknowledge and thank you for allowing us to give you the health and safety policy off table. That was really helpful to the team, and it is allowing us to progress very quickly through those other documentation that we need to, as you alluded, so thank you.
Thanks, Don.
So just to pick out a few highlights from the paper, as I'll take it as read. Nikki has already covered the marked increase in the number of incident assaults, so I won't labour that point, but just to say that we are always looking at that data and always trying to discern whether there are any trends or patterns or issues that we need to take further or escalate, which we continue to do and have done so with some success, in particular through OST, for example, where changes have been made on the back of the data that we actually are presented with. So apologies on slide 5. I'm not sure what has happened to the yellow highlighted section on the chart. However, it did denote a number that were significantly over the RIDDOR reportable 7-day absence. So looking at figures 2 and 3. So when I looked at this in some significant detail, those that were over 21 days equated to around 50%. And that was despite there only being mention of a minor injury, which raises some concern that perhaps these incidents may have culminated in a longer absence due to perhaps psychological harm. So I've arranged to meet with the health and wellbeing to see what measures we can put in place to monitor this further, and also to see what perhaps is already happening in relation to their action plan that was created from the recent HMICS frontline focus on wellbeing. So we're really keen to collaborate on that, and we are also likely to involve our colleagues at some stage from Your Safety Matters in that as well. So if we look to slide 7, disappointing to see that we've got some marked decreases in reporting again in some areas. It was discussed with me at a recent SMT back in March that there was a comment was made by a colleague that there is actually no response received by the sender of that report to say that the report has been read and understood and what should happen with an accident, incident or near miss report once it's been submitted. So we have taken that on board, and as a response to that, the health and safety admin team are now sending an email thanking the officer or staff member for that report, also providing a short narrative as to what will happen with it next and the level of action determined by the information that we receive. So we're currently trialling this with G Division, given that that's the largest division and the one that we get the most frequent accident, incident, near miss reports for, and we'll analyse that information to see if there's any marked improvement on the reporting at the end of Q1, and we will bring that information back to the board. If there is a marked improvement, then we will look to see how our new iteration, which is in development for the new accident, incident, near miss forum, can accommodate an automated version of that, so that it's not actually being manually manipulated. Moving on to slide 12, gives an oversight as to the outcomes of the certificate of assurance that we carried out in 24-25. Findings and recommendations have been uploaded to our 4-action system, which allows us to have much greater monitoring of progression of those actions. The health and safety team have now all had training to allow them to monitor that and to obviously look and open and close recommendations. The divisions and business support areas will also be able to control their own responses, and it's hoped that we will see a significant number of closures in the next report to the board as we embark on the next one, which will be leadership themed, and I will hopefully be able to provide further details of that at the next meeting to allow the board to understand what it is that we're being asked, or what we're asking of our senior leaders in this particular audit going forward in 25-26. If I may come to slide 16, we are delighted to welcome a new risk assessor to our team. This post is currently temporary, and it was afforded to us through the RIG bids. And what this is going to hopefully do is to ensure that our risk assessments are up to date, are of a high standard, and are indeed in line with any current mitigating controls available throughout the force. We've currently got around 65 risk assessment templates, and they are all needing to be updated. And we are also seeking to identify any new and emerging risks that may require risk assessed, or indeed any gaps that we may have identified. So the work that they will do in collaboration with the wider team and others throughout the organisation is to bring those templates up to date, which will undoubtedly help to improve the service that we provide. But it'll also highlight the expectation of what a good risk assessment should look like. That's the aspiration anyway. It will allow us to also highlight that these are templates, and they are therefore not to be just used as is, that they are used as a guide for divisions and for business areas as a support mechanism. And what they really should be doing is to add to that or address their own hazards and risks as they see fit. As part of that, we are continuing to offer risk assessment training, and we have seen a significant reduction in the number of people waiting in the P1 for that. Recently, we've done a real drive to get those numbers down, which hopefully you'll have seen in the report. Coming to slide 17, we've just recently had the conclusion of our BDO audit, which we asked for in relation to dangerous goods. There was no real surprises in the responses that we got from the auditor, and the plan is to, the plan has already started. I've developed an action plan based on the findings and the recommendations. And this plan will allow us to take forward those, and what we're going to do is we're going to amalgamate the current lithium-ion battery working group and the nitrous oxide working group and create an overarching dangerous goods working group. And the actions from that audit will be the focus of the TOR for that group. This will also help to focus the efforts of the external group that has been stood up, which is also going to be named the Dangerous Goods Working Group. However, this group will have representation from Crown Office, the Scottish Court and Tribunal Service, and the Law Society. And we had our second meeting this week, and I outlined what the draft TOR looks like for that. So hopefully we'll get that up and running and getting some real good output from that meeting, because this really is there to improve our end-to-end process and to try to reduce the organisational risk put upon Police Scotland to retain some of these potentially dangerous productions, and in some cases the unnecessary length of time that we are retaining them due to delays in the judicial system. So the BDO final terms of reference for our internal audit also were received, and our opening meeting took place yesterday, and I'm really looking forward to receiving the outcome of that the outcome of that audit, sorry, in mid-July. My hope is that it will emulate the current work plan that we already have in place in order to achieve higher standards of compliance across the force, but I also will welcome any additions to that where they foresee any gaps in that plan going forward. Just on the last slide that I want to bring up, slide 20, we've got almost 80% compliance on the fire safety awareness training, which now incorporates the fire warden responsibility. So that's really good in terms of the level of compliance, although it could be better. But work continues within the team to identify new ways of delivering this training and engaging with officers as well and staff. So we're also welcoming evaluation and feedback from staff in terms of what training input they would like to see from the team. And we've now, on the back of that, we are in the process of finalising our updated manual handling courses and COSH courses, and they will be available on Scope in the coming weeks. But as I said, we have seen a significant reduction in the number of P1s in some of the really high, the areas where they were high. So we've also collaborated with leadership and talent in relation to having an input into the management and leadership programmes, and a paper has already been prepared and is currently in the process of going through the internal governance structure. I think it's really important that we do have a seat at that table in terms of both of those programmes to relay the responsibilities and accountabilities that our leadership and management teams have when it comes to health and safety. Lastly, just to very shortly talk about the health and safety work plan, it continues to grow and to evolve, and we are well on track with the aims that were set out in the initial stages. We hope again to add to this plan going forward, as I've said, in relation to the internal audit that is due to start next week. So happy to take any questions, Chair, if there's something that I've missed or omitted.
Thanks very much indeed, Dawn, for that full report. Very informative indeed. Paul Eady.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of quick questions. The first, both relating to the certificates of assurance in page 12 or slide 12. You've got a reference to no response to the assured processors being received from 6 subdivisions, corporate comms and estate. Is that problematic, or is that acceptable?
Not acceptable, I would say. But certainly something that my team continues to engage with those areas in to see what delays there might have been in responding to that. We have tried to make the system, the certificate of assurance, extremely manageable in terms of what we're asking. It's very short, concise question set. And if the evidence is there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. And therefore, we can then provide the recommendations of what does need to be there. So we will continue to engage with these areas to try and get them to come forward with the responses that we asked.
But that doesn't cause us any problems with regulators or anything like that?
No.
No, that's good to hear. And the last question I've got is about what process for monitoring implementation of recommendations are in place.
So in the certificate of assurance, what we've done is we've utilised the system that we have in-house, which is the 4 action system. And what we have done is I've assigned those to who the SPOC was that was identified to us for them to take that forward, that action forward, and they can evidence that progression through the system, and my team, each with their areas of responsibility, will monitor that progress as it happens, and we will determine whether or not we feel that the recommendations have been met in terms of the evidence that's provided.
Great, thank you so much for that, Dawn.
No problem, thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. Alistair here.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Dawn. Appreciate the report and the explanations that you've given us to help us interpret what it's telling us. Just take this opportunity again to reiterate, it's totally unacceptable for any assaults on police officers. I know Tom highlighted it earlier. What's concerning me slightly in the report is it looks like a 55% increase in RIDDOR reports around assaults, which to me reads as them being more serious, these assaults. And I know we've already spoken about officer safety training, and you referenced that you use the data to inform that. We've got the body-worn cameras coming in. But given that concern, I'm just wondering what else in terms of the safety officers you've been discussing, you're thinking about going forward here?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it was really why it led me to do that little bit of a deeper dive, Alistair, into are people going off because they're actually injured physically, or are they taking that time to address the psychological harm that has been so that's a piece of work that I think that we need to take off table. We're also also, if you look at the data that Nikki and Damien have provided the board today, we do have an ageing workforce, and people perhaps are taking longer to recover. So all of these things have a detrimental effect on the RIDDOR reportable, because as you're aware, we do need to report any over 7-day absences.
Yeah.
So this is why, as well, we're just about to put out a memo as well to the force as a reminder of the importance of reporting these things to us, so that we can really identify where the problems are and how we can then support officers and staff in that area. Because as I've alluded to in the report, we still have some areas where we're not reporting enough, we are under-reporting. So but please take assurance that we do look at all of this data, and the work that is done within our the areas where they actually analyse, that analyse the data and can provide us with dashboards and the Power BI behind that, is, we can go to them at any time to get any information that we require, which is absolutely pivotal to making sure that we continually improve.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dawn. And there is a disconnect between the crime data and the reports. And I know over time that's improved significantly, but there's just a slight dip on that. So I think that's something that's really helpful. And just a final point that I just wanted to pick up on is the near miss reporting. And I was encouraged, as always, with the focus you've got on that, but the responses that people get, I think that communication, hopefully that will encourage people to understand the benefits of near miss reporting, that hopefully help us to understand what's happening and prevent an actual accident happening in the future. So just wanted to comment on that as well.
No, thank you. And yeah, that is the hope. But also, I've just recently had the demonstration of the new accident incident near miss reporting system, which will be through Scope, but it will be very intuitive, and it will provide a lot more drop downs, so that the information hopefully will be also consistent with what is coming in, rather than there being a lot of free text. And we're going to have a system in place that we're QAing that as we go, as opposed to waiting until we've got quite a lot of data to try and QA. We're going to try and do this, put in a process to QA that. But I hope that the new system, when it goes live, will also encourage people, because it's something that they'll be used to doing, because it's recognisable through Scope. The line managers will receive a notification of that Scope immediately within their work baskets, etc. in Scope, and it will change colour if it sits there for any period of time to alert them to the fact. So lots of really good work is going on in the background that, again, will hopefully help when it comes to the data and the performance that we can do going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Can I bring in our staff association and union colleagues at this stage? David Threadgill.
Thank you, Chair. Dawn, thank you. And please excuse the simplicity of this question. It's just my lack of detailed knowledge. But at 1D in the report, which is to do with report monitoring and assault reporting for 24-25, I'm just drawn to the figure for Highlands and Islands, which seems to show a 22.1 increase in the number of assaults. Is that statement as simple as that, or is there more to it that I simply don't understand? Thank you.
Yeah, no, not at all. No, it doesn't necessarily equate to that. It equates to perhaps that this correlates with what the crime report says. So this graph shows what the percentage of crime reports that the officers have put in and the incident report. So it may be that Highlands and Islands have actually reported as they should in the correct manner. That message is starting to get through in N Division. As opposed to them not, so they'll report that as a crime, as assault on their crime reports, but they haven't been necessarily reporting it through our accident incident near miss process.
Thank you. David Malcolm.
Thanks very much, Chair. It was just to just draw out a point from the notice of contravention that came from the Health and Safety Executive. It did also highlight the recommendation to review to determine how body armour can be stored. This is an issue that the members are having, because obviously the expectation is that they wear this body armour at all times within the custody suite for their own protection, and we understand that, and we've been supportive of that. But also it's causing them problems to access it if it's not readily available, and they've made the judgment not to be wearing it for a particular reason. And also if there is, they've been mobilised to another custody suite, they're not to carry body armour themselves in their vehicles. So that is now just to highlight that that's a piece of work that obviously we're interested in seeing progress.
Yeah. What location's that at, David? Is that in Aberdeenshire?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. It's a bit men have decided to turn up outside my room right now.
Where was this location?
So the notice of contravention from the Health and Safety Executive was the visit to Kitty Brewster.
Kitty Brewster, yeah. Just making sure I'm talking about the same thing. That, as you know, that's live at this moment, and we haven't had a formal paper to the committee for us to consider. So that I would expect that all to come forward. We're very alert to that's in the background. It's operational at the moment, and I've no doubt I would expect a paper in due course on the outcomes of this and the learning from it, and any issues that are needed in terms of policy. But clearly, body protection, etc., for the police staff is critical, particularly in custody. And I would expect that to be deeply covered in that report when it comes in due course. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just drawing it out for the board.
No, I'm grateful to you for doing it. I'm just giving the explanation why it's not a more detailed discussion today. I'm trying to let the operational scenario and the response to that come to a definite position, and then we can address it. Thanks for that. Any other points to come just now? Okay, David, your hand's still up there in the system. There's a couple of points from myself there. Really encouraged from your report, Don, that progressing towards specific line manager training in health and safety. I think as a committee we would endorse that, we'd see the benefits of that. And I would ask formally for the committee to endorse the health and safety strategic plan, work plan for 25-26, and members happy to endorse that. We've also got the feedback from the SPA officials who've looked at it in depth as well, who are happy that we do endorse it. So we're delighted to endorse that, Dawn, and again, thanks for your contribution today.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Move on to item 5. Have we got John McNellis on the line?
Good afternoon, Chair.
Right, John, thanks for joining us. The Authority benchmarking review of Audit Scotland reports.
Thank you. A slightly different paper from probably what you've seen the rest of today. This really just summarises for you a specific piece of benchmarking work that we've done in the SPA. So you might have seen in the press and at the Public Audit Committee of the Scottish Parliament, Audit Scotland have provided 2 reports recently highlighting issues in the WICS, which is the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. They highlighted some quite significant concerns and control weaknesses in that particular body. So the question that we asked ourselves for the SPA is, could any of the issues that have been highlighted by Audit Scotland arise in our organisation? And is there anything that we could learn from these reports, just as we normally try to look for good practice and any other lessons learned from audit and HMICS reports? So what this paper does is summarises a piece of work that we've undertaken to have a look at the detail of that report and what it could mean for ourselves. So just to summarise that, and there has been a lot more detail behind the paper that you've seen, we concluded that there are quite strong financial controls across the SPA, and the majority of the significant issues, well, all of the significant issues actually, we don't think could arise within SPA Police Scotland. What we did find is, like you'd always expect, there are a few areas where we could tighten up on our controls and learn some things and make some improvements. And most of those areas where we think we can make some improvements are in the people space. So that's one of the reasons why this paper is coming here today. We've highlighted that in the report, and it's really just next steps now to take this forward with the team at Police Scotland to look at how we can improve some policies and controls. And I'll just leave it there at that, and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, John, and it's really encouraging. I suppose I would use the phrase self-awareness of the authority to look at the learning from benchmarking Audit Scotland reports. Members, you've had the paper. Is there any questions you want to put to John at this stage? I think it's pretty comprehensive, John. Just a courtesy as well, our staff associations or unions, you'll have seen the paper. Is there anything you wish to raise? Hopefully you take comfort from it, actually. Okay, so that paper is noted, John. Thanks very much. So that brings us to the end of the public items today. There is some private business, which is updates that you'll see from the minutes in due course around pension forfeiture that we are going to take private. The overarching ethos of this committee is that we do our business in public. So at this stage, we've agreed items 6 and 7 under the standing orders will be taken in private. So can I ask that everyone who is not involved in this discussion and all external participants, that you please leave the call to allow the members only discussion for the remaining items. Thank you very much. But before you do go, can I say a huge thank you to Nikki and Dawn today, who have given the substantive items, and particularly Nikki, who really played a strong bat there. The questions coming out all day, but to both of you, a particular appreciation from the committee for your inputs today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much.
Let me just double check.